And okay, so we're going to talk about chord scales today, which is a... Wait, first of all, can everyone hear me all right? I checked it beforehand. Can you hear me when I play piano and speak at the same time? Stuff like that. Okay, so chord scales are a way of guiding your choice when you choose what pitches to play, basically, and that's in a compositional and an improvisational context. Piano can be a bit softer, turning that down. Cool. Why do we use chord scales? We use chord scales because we want to play notes that sound nice, consonant, well, not necessarily consonant, but pleasant to our ears and that suit the function of the chord they're playing. So a chord scale is assigning a specific scale to a specific chord in a piece. Quickly, if we look at There'll Never Be Another You, a chord scale would apply to each chord in the piece. So they're simply, and you can see I have a little piano in the bottom, so you can see what notes I'm playing, but I'll also say them out loud. Chord scale is made up of your chord. So let's say this first chord we have in here, E flat major 7, which is E flat G, E flat D, and then we extend upwards and play the upward tensions. So we have the 1, the 3rd, the 5th, the major 7th, and I can play the 9th, 11th, and 13th. That would be the chord in all of its tensions, and if you compress it down, so you have the chord here, and the tensions here, you get the full scale, which is just a major scale in this case. It's important to know that usually you'll be taking what's diatonic, so that F is diatonic to the key of E flat, the A flat's diatonic to the key of E flat, the C is diatonic key to the key of E flat. So you're basically taking the diatonic extensions, compressing them down into a single scale. So of course that's really simple, but the notes themselves aren't the only aspect of chord scales. The other big aspect is the concept of avoid notes and available tensions. Not everything, not every diatonic tension will sound good over every chord. As you can hear, this doesn't sound great. And so let's look at each tension and see if it's available or it's unavailable. So our first tension is the 9. The 9 is available in this context because it is consonant, well, reasonably consonant. It's a major 9th above the chord tone, the nearest chord tone. Above the nearest chord tone, so it's a major 9th above the E flat, consonant. Same thing with the 13. 13 is a major 9th above a chord tone, so it's consonant. When we play the A flat, the 11, it's actually a minor 9th above the 3rd, a minor 9th above a chord tone. And because of that, we say it's unavailable. Not only because of the dissonance, which is unpleasant on this major chord, but also because having that 4th makes the function less clear. If you're playing a major chord, it's got a tonic function. Well, no, sorry, if you're playing a 1 major 7, like this E flat, this piece that's an E flat, putting that 4 in gives it some other kind of quality. It makes it sound like either dominant or subdominant, and either way, you don't want that. So, again, looking at this major chord, we have an available 9 and an available 13. And if we hop over to that sheet I made, you can see that I've laid that out clearly. The tensions are labeled as T9 or T13, and they're diamond-headed. And the avoid notes are just labeled as scale tones, so it's scale tone 4. And the purpose of defining what's available and what's not is mainly just so it's a guide when you're building chords. Like if you're looking at this piece and you see this E flat major 7, you know that you can play an F on it, you know you can play a C on it, and it'll pretty much always sound good. Of course, you can play an A flat if you're soloing and you go through it quickly, you know? That kind of thing, because in that case, you're not honking on it. If you honk on it, it'll sound bad. You know, within reason. So let's go through this chart here and just demonstrate how you would figure out what chord scales to use and how to use them in context. So where we're up to right now is, so now our next chord is this D minor 7 flat 5, which is another name for D half diminished. You might be familiar with that. So the D half diminished chord here is a diatonic chord. It's the 7 minor 7 flat 5. And most diatonic chords will take a simple chord scale. In this case, it's going to take the 7th mode of E flat, which is D Locrian. So it's going to take D Locrian. So you're basically playing the E flat scale, but you're pretending it starts in D in this case. What's the purpose of that? It's got two main purposes. One is because when you get to more diatonic notes, you want to be thinking, always be thinking about what chords you're in. So if you think I'm in E flat for this whole piece, it won't work out. And the other reason is because you get to figure out what the different avoid notes are and what available tensions there are. So again, let's look at this chord. We have the D, F, A flat, C. And if we extend it to the diatonic tensions, we get this flat 9, 11, and flat 13. Let's quickly look at what might be available. The flat 9 has is a minor ninth away from the root, so we don't think it's available. That G is a major ninth away from the F, so it is available. And that's really common, you know, you hear that a lot. The B flat is a major ninth away from the flat 5, so that's also available. And you'll hear that too. You can get some great voice leading. That kind of stuff. So we can just quickly write in here, we have a 7 minor 7 flat 5, which takes Locrian. And that basically works for all diatonic chords. So we can quickly go through this piece and fill out what diatonic chords there are. So G7 is not diatonic to E flat. The C7 is, and the C7 is the 6 minor 7. So it's going to take Aeolian. The B flat minor 7 is not diatonic, neither is that. Now this is diatonic, that's the 4 major 7. It's going to take Lydian. Oh, this is not how I play this tune. Sorry, I just grabbed this from the internet. Here most people play D flat 7, which is not diatonic, so we'll get back to that later. This is the same as before, this is the same as before, this is not diatonic, and this guy here is the 2 minor 7, so he's going to take Dorian. I want to quickly talk about Dorian because it has a small exception. If you're following along with the sheet here, Aeolian and Lydian are pretty straightforward, but Dorian's a bit different. Now let's take a look at this part of the song. We're coming in from Anyways, so we're there. Now, if you look at Dorian, we've got here F minor 7. If we extend the tensions upwards, we get the 9, the 11, the 13. The 9 and the 11 make sense. Very common, very used. But the 13, you would think it's available because it's a minor. It's a major ninth away from the chord tone. And it sounds pleasant. But the reason it's not used in chord voicing so much is because it makes the function less clear. This is acting as a 2 minor 7 chord. So what this chord wants to do is go 2, 5, 1. So when we okay, sorry, let me just quickly answer this question. Diatonic in this context, I'm talking every chord tone is diatonic. So the G7 has the non-diatonic third. So that one tone there is non-diatonic. So if the G was diatonic, it would be a G minor 7, because we're in E flat. But instead it's the G7, non-diatonic third. It's a secondary dominant, and I'll get back to that quickly. Anyways, talking about Dorian, that 13 makes the function less clear because when we go to the B flat chord, that's the leading tone. So it's really determining the dominant function of the chord, whereas with the F minor 7, we want a subdominant function because it's kind of acting like a 4, 5, 1, except now it's 2, 5, 1. So we want to leave the D out of that in most contexts so that the function is very clear. And this is also a diatonic chord, so that's 5, 7. It's going to take mixolydian, which I'm just going to probably call mixo from now on. Okay, the rest of this tune is basically the same, except for the end, which I can talk about later. Anyways, let's talk about these non-diatonic chords. So our first non-diatonic chord is the G7, which, as I said, is non-diatonic because it has the raised third instead of G minors. Got the B. And so this is a secondary dominant. It's acting as the 5 of 6. So we're in E flat. C minor is the 6. This is the 5 of 6. The easiest way to figure out the chord scale for secondary dominants is so every chord scale is going to have the chord tones in it. G, B, D, F. Now, when we extend to the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th, we just pick diatonic tones. So, if we go up a third from F, we have A, and our diatonic A is A flat. If we go up another third, our diatonic C is C, and our diatonic E is E flat. Now here's another difference. Remember I said that we call tensions unavailable if they have like unpleasant dissonances, or if they get in the way of the function. On dominant chords, we do really want a dissonant sound full of tension so that when it releases, it's stronger. So having these minor ninths in it is actually wanted. We call those available tensions on a secondary dominant like this. So we have tension flat 9 and tension flat 13. See how they resolve? It's fine. However, that doesn't mean that we can play the C, which would be tension 11, because even it's a flat 9 between the B and the C. We don't want to play it because the C is part of the target. We want to get the resolution of T do. So if we put the C in the dominant chord, it ruins that resolution. So if we look at that chord, we could call that mixolydian, flat 9, flat 13. There's another thing we missed out. If we're looking at this chord, we can also put a B flat in there. A B flat is also diatonic, and that's the minor third, right? But since you already have the third, that's called a sharp 9. So we can have the flat 9 and the sharp 9. And that would make our scale kind of weird. Oops, sorry. But that's okay. That's an octatonic scale. And that works too. Moving on to our next chord. So I'll get back to this B flat minor 7 quickly. Let's look at this E flat 7. It's another secondary dominant. It's acting as the 5 of 4. Oh yeah, split third chords. That's what classical musicians call that. Like, I think Bartók likes them a lot and stuff like that. In this situation, you'll usually find that the sharp 9 is above, like in this kind of voicing where we have the root, the third, the sharp 9, or the minor third. Sometimes you will totally hear it down here. In which case they're so close, it does act a lot more like split third chords, which are really cool. Anyways, so back to this 5-7 of 4. Let's work it out the same way before. We've got the chord tones here, and let's extend to diatonic tensions. The 9, the 11, and the 13. And you'll see we just end up having mixolydian, except this time it's based on the first scale degree. So sometimes when you have secondary dominants, your chord scales are going to be really weird, and sometimes it's just going to be ordinary mixolydian, like in this 5-7 of 4. Now this B flat minor 7 here is also non-diatonic, and it's acting as a related 2. So this is the 5 of 4. 5 of 4. And this is the 2 of that 5. So you could call this the 2 of 4. And that's what we call a related 2 chord. Related 2 chords pretty much always take Dorian. It's just like if we were playing the home keys 2-5. So related 2s take Dorian. This D flat 7 chord is not a secondary dominant, because if you think about it, I'm just going to play all the chords until we hit the D flat 7. Now, where do you expect it to go? Do you expect it to go down a fifth? Not really, because down a fifth would be to the flat 3. It's not a diatonic chord. You don't really have that expectation. So we don't call that a secondary dominant. We call that a dominant chord without dominant function, or just flat 7-7 in this case. Those kind of chords usually take a chord scale that's based on melodic minor. It's called, there's too many names, Lydian dominant, Lydian flat 7, mixolydian sharp 11, all those kinds of things. You can see it pretty clearly if you just do a usual process of play the chord tones and then extend to diatonic tensions. Diatonic 9, diatonic 11, which is a sharp 11 in this case, and a diatonic 13. So collapse it down and you get the Lydian dominant scale. Sorry, I'm really sleepy. Anyways, that's the Simpson scale, I think. I'm not really sure if it is. Yeah, anyways, the Simpson scale, and that Simpson scale applies to most dominant chords without dominant functions, such as our flat 7-7. Another non-dominant chord with non-dominant function is 4-7. And, you know, even other non-diatonically rooted dominant 7 chords. So if we end up with something like this, and I'm going to play E7, that E7 can also take the Lydian dominant scale. Oh yeah, acoustic scale is another name for this stupid thing. I wish we could decide on one thing. I kind of don't like calling it Lydian dominant because I think of it as mixed Lydian with a sharp 11, but that's too much of a mouthful anyways. So yeah, all sorts of dominant scales will take Lydian dominant. Moving on, we have the 1 major 7 and the 6 minor 7. We've gone over those chord scales already. Now we have this F7. It's another secondary dominant. It's acting as the 5 of 5. So we had the 2-5, and now it's the same thing, except this one has a it's a dominant, not a minor chord. Same process. Chord tones, diatonic 9, diatonic 11, and then look at what you got. This 11 is the minor ninth away, so it's unavailable. And we get good old ordinary mixed Lydian on this 5 of 5. Shit. Oh, no, I did it correctly. Yeah, this one's 5 of 5. I was scared I mixed up 5 of 5 and 5 of 4, which both take mixed Lydian. Let's ignore these bracketed chords. I usually just play through F7 on this whole thing. And then we hit 2, 5, and 1. So let's just have a quick look at what we have so far. I'm going to play through the chords of the A section of this. So how do you use this knowledge we have? The most important part is knowing the avoid notes, especially if you're playing chords or you're writing chordal parts. Unless you have a really good reason to, you should just avoid them because they can very easily end up sounding bad. If you're comping, it's really simple. You just think, okay, I want to play this E major 7 chord. What available tensions do I have? I can throw them on top. And you can mix it up every time. Like, that's what's so good about knowing the chord scales, is you know that when you hit the G7, not only can you play this with the flat 9 and flat 13, you can also mix it up and play the sharp 9 instead. You can play the sharp 9 and the flat 9 together if I have enough hand span. And it just helps to guide your choices. The same thing applies to when you're soloing. You want to stay on chord tones and available tensions, and you want to pass through avoid notes. Because if you land on them, you honk them, it's going to sound dissonant, especially if you're not playing the chords. Because if you're playing the chords, you can leave whatever note that it'll resonate dissonantly with. But if you're not playing the chords and you're just soloing, you should stay out of those prolonged usage of those or accented usage of them. So there, I was basically mostly only playing chord tones, available tensions, and throwing in a passing tone, which usually contains an avoid note or maybe a chromaticism. And it goes a long way to helping you navigate pieces like this, or in your own pieces when you stumble across a chord you really like, whatever you're writing, you look at the chord tones and you can really tell what will work melodically over it, because you can analyze your own pieces the same way you'll analyze somebody else's pieces. Now, let's talk a little bit about alternatives. So there's always alternatives to pretty much every chord scale, because these are just suggestions and they're guiding principles, they're not set in stone. Some every time you have a major chord, even if it should take Ionian, such as the 1 major 7, you can play Lydian instead if you want that extra, I'm not sure how to put it, the extra sound on top, you know. You can definitely play like that, and lots of people do towards the end of tunes. They add on a lot of altered tensions. Another altered tension I really like is anytime something takes Locrian, instead of having the flat 2, you can have a natural 2. So let's look at our second chord here. It's a D minor 7 flat 5. Usually it has a flat 2 in the chord scale, but you can give it a natural 2, and that helps you play more melodically because you just have more available to you. And it lets you play really big chords because it bridges gaps. Sorry, I played the natural 5 in there too, that's stupid. Anyways, there we go. So there's that natural 2. With this very common structure, I'm playing an A flat augmented major 7 and dropping the root underneath. That's a very useful structure anyways, like you can take that and you can also use that for B flat 7 or E7. Maybe not so much. That one's better for E7. Anyways, you get the idea. There's a lot of substitutions to learn. They tend to take from scales that are derived from melodic minor, such as the Locrian natural 2, that's from melodic minor. If I figure out quickly what it is, yeah, F melodic minor. And the Lydian dominant chord, natural, the acoustic scale, sorry, that also takes from melodic minor. So let's quickly talk about some limitations to the chord scale system, because it's something you can easily, and I've seen people easily get obsessed with it too much, and it blocks off a lot of ways of thinking. So since you guys are new to this, it's important to know where it doesn't work. The biggest hole in chord scales is that it doesn't touch on chromaticism at all, basically. And that's really important in jazz and maybe in the style of music you're interested in playing. You know, so it gives you an Ionian chord scale, but doesn't ever like suggest that you can put in chromaticisms like just passing notes. Or approach notes. So that's definitely something you need to keep your mind open to. And there's also a lot of voicings that let you play lots of voicings that'll let you play avoid notes in a way that's really nice. Let's have a look at that C minor 7 chord. It takes Aeolian, which has the flat 13, which is an avoid note, but there's ways you can play it, like this voicing. Very beautiful, and it still functions as C. And that's because you put the 13 below the 5. And it makes it really ambiguous, so in some situations it definitely wouldn't work, like, is this a C chord, or is this an F chord? The voicing works for both of them, which is why if you really want the harmony to be really clear, you might avoid it. But in this song, I think you can totally get away with it. So I don't think I really ruined the function of the C minor 7 chord there. So it's good to keep your mind open to these alternate voicings that allow you to play avoid notes. Another, they tend to be flat 13s that you can play with interesting voicings, like those kind of voicings. So that's a G minor chord, but you just change all the Ds for E flats. It's kind of like an E flat major chord. basically when you're doing these things with avoid notes, you create some ambiguities, which sometimes works and sometimes sounds pretty. Marco Polonian, the avoid notes are notes that imply different chord scale than what you're going for. So it's not really that, because the avoid notes are part of the chord scale. Let's take a look at Ionian, the first chord of There Never Be Another You. The A flat is an essential part of the chord scale. You can't call that Ionian without the A flat. But the A flat, if you put it in a chord, it's going to make it sound like maybe like a D minor 7 flat 5 chord, maybe like an A flat major chord, maybe an F minor chord. So when you play like that, the function's really clear. That's an E flat major chord. If you put it in something like this, yeah, there's some tension in there, and you don't necessarily want that tension in a 1 major 7 chord. It feels like it wants to resolve kind of like a... In that case, I resolved it like an F minor chord. So that's what avoid notes really do. They create ambiguities in the function, but they are an essential part of the chord scale. You won't have, if you exclude them, if you just like totally forget about them, you're missing out a lot of color and distinction that you can bring to your piece just by, yeah, that would be like a 5/7 add 4, right? Oh, speaking of fourths and sus chords, let's talk about sus chords. So Mixolydian. So the let's look at the B flat 7 in this piece. Takes Mixolydian. And as we noticed, the avoid note is the 11, the E flat, because of the minor ninth between the D and the E flat. But if you have a sus chord, that replaces basically the thirds with fourths. So in this case, the major third, is now an avoid note, because if you slap that in with the fourth, it just sounds less clear. You can, and this is like getting into things that not every jazz theorist agrees on, use that major third above the 11th as a kind of tension 10. It sounds like this. So we're using both the 11th and the 3rd. That sounds really nice. But if you were wanting to use as a sus chord, that might make the function more ambiguous. So the root always has to be in the bass, no inversions. Not necessarily. Inversions as a whole are less common in jazz than they are in classical. In classical, you'll see them pretty much in every piece and pretty much in every section. In jazz, they tend not to be used because the 7 chords have a lot less ambiguity. Like if you have this and then you root that same thing on the G, because it's got so much stuff on it, and because you're also playing all these tensions, the harmony is much more root driven. Some people could argue, some people do argue that it's completely root driven. There's no inversions when you start using all these huge extended tensions. But there are some inversions. Let me think of a piece right now. Well, I can't think of a piece on top of my head with an inversion, but they do exist, and then you would just treat them as the root position chord in terms of the chord scale. Yeah, let's see my notes. Oh, and also another thing about root-driven harmony is that these thirdless structures are also really common in jazz. So like this kind of thing, your sus chord has no third. This kind of thing has no third. Here you're playing every note in the chord scale, so the third is kind of ambiguous, which is the third. And that kind of also contributes to the fact that harmony in jazz is very root-driven, so you don't get so many inversions. When you go back to simpler jazz, especially stuff that's based on show tunes, there's definitely inversions in there. It's a lot of the times used as, what's the word? When you resolve a dominant chord in a surprising way. I'm totally blanking. Anyways, I think that's pretty much all the basics. Let me just look. I brought up 2 more tunes. I might just look through them quickly, see if there's anything I wanted to speak about. I'm not sure where they were. Anyways, does anyone have any questions? I might be able to bring them back to another tune that I have prepared. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like usually in jazz, the chords will also follow with the root. Sometimes you'll get stuff that's totally not with it. Like I've been playing around with a lot of suspending totally unrelated chords. Like this is a B flat minor over a C kind of thing. And there, the root is really the only thing anchoring that to C at all. And if you use it in a tonic function, it does have its very unique quality. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention about the limitations of chord scales is, since they do seem to be kind of set in stone, they may dissuade you from looking beyond. And this is really common. Let's look at Lydian and just take a C Lydian scale right now. C Lydian scale right now. Oh, I'm blocking the shit. Anyways, so C Lydian. We have the 9, sharp 11, 13. So if you compact that down to a simple chord scale, you get C Lydian. But you'll quickly find if you start to like play a lot. You see how the root kind of sticks out and sounds like a void note because of that tritone you get when you play the root above the sharp 11. You can totally alter the scale further, and you can have a chord scale that doesn't even include the root. So we're playing the C major 7 chord. And in our chord scale, we could have a C sharp. Essentially, we're now playing D Ionian. And that can sound better than playing that root in the melody. And that's one thing you need to watch out for when you're like strictly following chord scales. And this has happened to me a lot. Like I've recently wrote a piece with a major 7 over a dominant chord. So that's a dominant chord with some minor altered tensions at top. But you wouldn't think that you could put the major 7 on a dominant chord, and most chord scale theory would tell you otherwise as well. But I wrote a piece that had this chorale section that went something like this. So right there on the G7 chord, I've got that major 7, C major 7. That's on a dominant chord, so you have that minor 9th, 5th. So you should always be willing to experiment and go beyond chord scales. You'll find some really cool sounds. And yeah, Twitch has a 7-second delay. I was gonna look into using a different different streaming service. There's some new ones that have come out for video games that purport to have no delay at all, but I didn't have time to look into it. So voicing rules in jazz, they basically are not anything like classical rules. Parallels are totally good and encouraged, you know, especially if the structure is constant. Stuff like that is really common and encouraged. Usually when you voice, you put tensions on top, chord tones below. That's not always the case. Like this is a very simple and nice voicing for C major 7. And that's got the tension 9 on the bottom. Some voicings really don't work if you put the tension on the bottom. Like if I want to play C major 7 sharp 11 and I put the sharp 11 on the bottom, it'll sound like ass. Just quickly change it around. So you usually want to put tensions above, but not necessarily. Nothing about parallelisms. You do obviously want to keep your voices as smooth as possible. But there aren't too many voice leading rules that are specific to jazz other than what sounds good. And yeah. Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, I think that'll be that for this stream. I can post more questions in the thread that I can get to. Otherwise, bye guys, thanks for tuning in.